The Adventures of a South Pole Pig, a novel of snow and courage by Chris Kurtz. Chapter 27.
Hi guys, it's Miss Kay from Brantwood Elementary, and I am going to be reading Chapter 27 of The Adventures of a South Pole Pig. Flora's head felt light. She felt sick and wanted to lie down. She sat with a thud. Oscar sighed. Pulling is for dogs. Do you think Amos likes you because of your personality? Think about it, said Sophia. They want you on their adventure, all right, but not for the reason you think. No, Flora whispered. But the signs were all there. She had a purpose on this expedition, and it had nothing to do with how smart she was, or brave, or strong. She was food. Oscar turned and sniffed at the hole he had finished. He gave the piled snow at the entrance a swipe. I think it's big enough now. Flora stood up and backed into it. Her ears were ringing, and she barely noticed when her friend said goodbye. Sophia stopped once and looked back, but it had begun to snow, and they were soon out of sight. Flora slid in deeper and curled up. She found that her back legs could tuck inside the bottom of her coat. Her hole was warm as could be. She shivered anyway. The snowflakes slowly filled in the opening as if filling in a grave.
The Adventures of a South Pole Pig, a novel of snow and courage by Chris Kurtz. Chapter 28.
Hi, I'm Reagan Lucas. I'm the speech language pathologist at Beverly Gardens and at Stebbins. I'll be reading Chapter 28 in The Adventures of the South Pole Pig. For 2 snowy days, Flora lay in her little cave. When she got thirsty, she ate snow. When she got hungry, she struggled up through the powder and walked around until feeling eased, being careful never to lose sight of her frozen home. Cold, white emptiness was everywhere, and it pulled the hope from her heart. Don't give up. This time the words didn't work. Flora tried to find a memory from her piglet days on the farm, a thought or a picture that could be a source of warmth to melt the ice in her mind. Luna. Flora worked hard to remember everything about her old friend, her face, the way she held her tail, the color of her fur, the sound of her voice, and a warm light came. Flora would almost always hear their conversations about dogs and stars and even the ocean. Luna seemed to know so much about life. Flora's thoughts froze. She tried not to think, yet she couldn't stop the truth from crowding in. Luna knew all the time how Flora would end up. I'm a fool, a big, fat fool. Well, not fat, really, at least not anymore. This was a cruel world she had been born into, all pink and squirming. She'd never wanted to see the reality. Now, like the cold, it was impossible to ignore. She curled into a tight ball. At the end of 2 days, Flora had to fight a growing feeling of panic. By now, Oscar would be off with the dog team, and she was sure Sophia had tried to figure out the way back to her and couldn't. Her thoughts turned darker. Perhaps she had been left there to die. Probably her friends had chosen this fate for her. Starvation versus the knife. Flora wasn't sure which she would have chosen, but she didn't like someone else choosing for her. Then she thought she heard Sophia calling her name. It sounded like a voice from a dream. Flora wanted to jump up and shake off her snow hole like a dirty blanket. She wanted to race out and be found, but things were different now. She was food. She had to be looked after, protected like a baby. She was a burden, not a team member. She pushed her head through the thin roof. Oscar was there. He was sniffing around in circles. Sophia was sitting and calling. When Oscar saw her, he came running up, licked her chin. Sophia ran a few steps too, but then catching herself, slowed to a dignified walk. Flora stumbled out on legs that felt stiff and wooden. She nosed the cat in the ribs. She had to admit she was delighted to see her friends again, but she didn't want to be delighted. "I see you're still alive," Sophia gave in to acting like a kitten and batted Flora's cheek with a paw. It wasn't too bad. This huge lie was the only thing Flora could think to say. "We would have come back sooner if it was possible," said Sophia. "It's safe now. Amos is gone." Flora changed the subject. "What are you still doing here, Oscar? I thought you'd be out pulling." Oscar looked to the horizon and didn't answer. "They wouldn't take him," Sophia said softly. "He tried. He stood in the lead spot, and when it was time to get in the harness, they wouldn't hook him up. Smart, if you ask me. He's not well." "Pulling is like medicine," Oscar said. "You wouldn't understand." Flora winced. Poor Oscar. "He was almost as upset as Alaric," said Sophia. "They both got left behind." As Oscar led them back to camp, Sophia continued about how Amos had screamed and waved his knives at everyone until the whole camp was out searching for Flora, and how he tried to use the dogs to track his escaped pig. Oscar thought ahead, though. Sophia glanced at Oscar. He dragged the search team in one wrong direction after another. Of course, they'd never even got close to your hiding place. Sophia wanted to smile. She wanted to dance around and laugh at the image of Big Amos thundering around in the wrong places. But she felt empty, hollowed out. "They finally had to give up," said Sophia. Amos and the other men finished loading and hooked up the dogs. Off they went to get help. Only the captain and the sailor with the broken leg stayed behind with Alaric. "Why didn't they take the captain?" asked Flora. "Too sick to travel." Oscar looked back at them to answer. "And wait. Sled dogs are strong, but every pound counts. There weren't enough of them to do the job. I could have pulled, though. They needed me. Pulling is like medicine for a sled dog." He hung his head. "You said that already," said Sophia. "Well, it's true." Sophia caught Flora's eyes and shook her head. Twice on the walk back, Flora noticed Oscar breathing hard. Something rattled in his throat whenever he got winded. Sophia would pretend to be tired and need a rest, and they would all stop until Oscar looked able to go on. It was during the stops that Flora noticed how hungry she was. Hungry enough to eat a boot, laces and all. Where did the men and the dogs go? Where were the men and the dogs going, she asked. Did they change their minds and head for the food station? No, they're going north, said Oscar. Anywhere people might be. They'll put to sea when they find a good place. If they can find help, they'll come back the same way, I expect. If they don't find help, Flora knew how that sentence ended. If they came back without finding help, they'd think again about killing the pig.
The Adventures of a South Pole Pig, a novel of snow and courage by Chris Kurtz. Chapter 29.
Hi, I'm Mrs. Carr at Brantwood Elementary, and today I'm going to be reading Chapter 29 to you. Alaric was the only one outside when they came into camp. "Hey, the pig is back," he called. A limping sailor hobbled on a wooden stick, came to the front door of the snow cabin. Flora didn't like the way he looked at her. She would be keeping far away from that one. Alaric put out 3 small frozen fish that Flora attacked. She looked up to see Sophia and Oscar watching. She felt a little ashamed, but still couldn't help licking the snow where the fish had been. It was her first meal in 3 days, and she felt almost as hungry as before. Alaric scratched her behind the ears. "I wish I could give you more." His fingers moved under her chin. "I never met an animal with better timing than you when it comes to killing rats and not getting killed yourself. You are one smart pig. Now we all need to figure out how you and the rest of us can stay alive until they come back." Flora glanced at the sailor with the stick. Men and animals all slept in the snow shelter together now. The nights were getting colder, and the snow shelter was smaller and kept the warmth better than the drafty cabin with a lifeboat as a roof. Most of the books were gone, boxes were gone, along with the other dogs, so there was plenty of room. Alaric had made beds for the men by layering several blankets for padding, and the captain spent all his time in bed, for he was still weak and spoke very little. Flora decided she'd curl up against him at night to keep him warm. It was an easy job. Flora's knowledge about her role in the expedition was not the only thing that changed during her time in the hole. She didn't feel the cold as she had before either. After those 2 days on her own, her body was able to handle the freezing temperatures. She could now stand being outside for several hours each day. She still kept up her trot around the camp, partly out of habit and partly so she'd be fit to run if the sailor ever got close. But the biggest challenge in Flora was that she no longer dreamed of dog sledding. She dreamed only of food. She was always hungry. One morning, Flora heard the sound of pounding. She gently pulled herself away from the captain's side and walked to the doorway. Alaric had found a hammer, saw, and nails. He was taking loose boards from wooden crates and making them into a box. Then he dragged the lifeboat off the top of the empty cabin and banged on it until it fell apart. He laid out 2 curved pieces from the front of the boat, parallel to each other like sled runners. He placed straight boards across both runners, nailed them down tight, and then attached the wooden box he had made. "What does he think he's doing?" Sophia stepped up beside her. "It's a homemade sled," said Flora. They watched Alaric tie a rope to the front of the box. He made a loop in the free end. Then Flora heard the captain's voice calling. Alaric ducked past them into the snow shelter. In a few minutes, he returned, pulling the captain on a blanket. The captain's eyes were brighter, and Flora thought he appeared to have regained some of his strength. Alaric helped him sit up with his back against the wall of the shelter so he could see. But it was Oscar who had the most interest in the project. After so many days of rest, he seemed to be feeling much better. He sniffed the loop at the front of the sled, walked around the whole thing, and then stayed close to Alaric's side, even getting on her foot at times, especially when Alaric bent to pick up the loop. A spark of Flora's old feelings flickered to life. She tried not to remember. She tried not to feel. "Stop it," she told herself. But her desire to run with a team, to come through when everyone was counting on her, maybe even have a crack at leading the pack, that feeling wouldn't go away. The truth was, Flora wanted to walk, no, dance around the whole sled herself. Fiercely, she pushed those thoughts away. She crawled back into the snow shelter, into the darkest corner, and spent the rest of the day alone. But that night, in her dream, she flew high above the earth in a moonless sky. Behind her, like a falling star, sailed a silver sled.
The Adventures of a South Pole Pig, a novel of snow and courage by Chris Kurtz. Chapter 30.
Hello, families. Hi, I'm Mrs. Dennis, and I'm a kindergarten teacher at Seville Elementary, and I cannot wait to read this chapter of the book. It has been so good. I'm reading The Adventures of the South Pole Pig, and I'm reading chapter 30. So I can't wait to have you follow along with me, and let's find out what happens. Here we go. That sled you're building is more than just a toy, isn't it? It was the captain's voice. Alaric and the 2 men were sitting on their beds. Flora looked around. Where were Oscar and Sophia? She inched toward the door. I hate being hungry all the time, and if the others don't make it back... Alaric had a hammer in his hand. He began scraping at the floor of the snow shelter with the claw end, but then stopped and tamped the loose snow back into place. You said there was a food station 3 days out, and that it's not needed now for the expedition. I'd like to go find it and bring supplies back. Well, by now you probably know how to use the sun and stars to navigate from watching the crew, the captain said. And of course, the dog has already been there. These sled dogs have an amazing ability to remember their way back to a place they've already visited. And Oscar is one of the best. But even for me, with all of my experience, it's extremely dangerous, even reckless, to head into that inhospitable terrain alone. Besides, I'm not convinced the dog is well enough to pull. It will be a heavy load when the supplies are added. But Oscar looks almost like his old self. Elric thumped the side of his boot with the hammer. The captain hesitated. Let's discuss this again in a few days. My health has been improving steadily. I should be the one to make the journey. Flora shook her head. Oscar was looking much better, but he was hardly back to his old self, and the captain would be lucky if he could even stand without help in a few days. We don't need more food, the sailor poked his stick into the snowy floor. Why don't we just eat the pig? Flora felt the hairs on her neck stand up. She measured the remaining distance to the door. She could make a run for it if the sailor got any ideas about jumping on her. That pig saved my life. It was the captain. Well, it could save your life again, Captain, and I know just the recipe. The captain did not answer. Flora slipped out and walked until the camp was barely visible. She wished she could just keep walking. She was so tired of being afraid. Later that morning, the captain was dragged out of his place against the shelter. Tell me if you see something that will make this thing glide better, Elric said to him. Then looping the rope over his neck and under one shoulder, he gave the new sled a pull. Oscar followed, woofing. When Elric didn't stop, Oscar ran in front and almost tripped the boy until Elric took the loop off and placed it around Oscar. The big dog now walked like a king, pulling the sled with his head high. About 10 steps later, the loop slipped off his chest and down to the snow. Oscar picked it up in his teeth and dragged the sled another few steps, making everyone laugh. Flora couldn't help but smile, too. I feel better already. Oscar flopped down beside her. He looked better, although he was breathing hard. Pulling is like medicine, Flora finished. I know, you told me already. Yep, said Oscar, and I've been needing a dose of that medicine for a long time. After a quick rest, Elric brought out a second rope. Flora's heart jumped, but he tied the new rope to the sled and made a loop for himself. He adjusted Oscar's rope so it wouldn't slip off. Together, they pulled the sled in a tight circle as a team. Flora couldn't stand it any longer. She trudged away again, this time far into the white until the sounds from camp faded. She looked all around. It was so strange to feel trapped in the middle of so much open space. But that was exactly how she felt. When she finally followed her tracks back, the sled was gone, and so was everyone else except the captain. He had fallen asleep sitting up. Flora lay down at his side. They both woke up to a loud whooping. The sled seemed to be returning from a trial run. Sophia hopped off as they came to a stop and batted playfully at Oscar, who was pulling the sled by himself. Elric had made him a sort of harness out of smaller ropes. Oscar looked happy but tired. Elric helped the sailor stand up from where he had been sitting in the bottom of the box and then unhooked Oscar. Sir, Elric walked up to the captain and saluted. We've practiced with extra weight in the sled. A fully grown man plus me and the dog did fine. I know you wanted more time to consider, but we don't have time. I'd like permission to go out in the search of the food stores. The captain looked at his boots. Oscar joined the boy and Elric reached down and patted him on the ribs. I have the strength to help Oscar pull if he need be, but I'm not getting any stronger on the little bit of food we get each day. The captain shook his head. My mind is made up. It's no job for a boy alone. We'll devise a plan in a few days. Elric crossed his arms. He looked bigger and more confident than the boy Flora had met that first day on the dock. I know I'm only a cabin boy, but you were the one who said you never know where brains and talent will come from. It might be time to find out. No, the captain's voice was kind but firm. Permission denied. I would be sending you to your doom. Yes, sir. Flora was surprised at how easily Elric seemed to give up. The boy looked around at the fading light. It's time to get inside, sir, and have a bite to eat. It's too cold for you out here. Alaric covered the captain's legs with the blanket and gently pulled him into the snow shelter. After Alaric dished out the evening meal, he tucked more blankets around the captain while everyone got ready for bed. Flora lay down again at the captain's side. "Keep me warm, pig," said Alaric. Flora woke up in the middle of the night. She listened for the sound that had awakened her, but all was silent. She raised her nose to sniff the air and then cocked her head and listened again. The captain was breathing slow and steady. The sailor was snoring loudly, but something was different. Alaric and Oscar were missing, and so was Sophia. Flora stepped outside quietly so as to not wake anyone. She looked around in the half-light. The sled was gone, but the runners had made clear marks in the snow, disappearing in a straight line into the great wilderness. Flora knew this was no practice run. No matter what the captain had said, Alaric and Oscar and Sophia were off on their brave quest, and they had left Flora behind. I wonder what will happen next.